Welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
I'm Tim Wade.
And my name is Joe Augustine. And by the way, I've noticed something about the way we go out on LinkedIn. All that stuff we just said actually doesn't go out on LinkedIn. It takes a while before it actually feeds out onto LinkedIn. So maybe now.
Well, that's Andrea Edwards. I'm Tim Wade, and that's Joe Augustine.
Well, there you go.
That's right. So while we're doing this kind of stuff, why don't we do this? What we're about to say may or may not tickle your fancy. Why don't you like and subscribe, do whatever you have to do on social to give us a bit of support. If you think we deserve it after some time, keep it going. If you don't, just unlike us, unsubscribe, whatever it is. That's the deal. Anyway, the No Show is a kind of show where we try to do things that you don't normally hear about in your typical TikTok feed or whatever it is. We talk about news and stuff that maybe isn't on everybody's radar, but we think is kind of important. Some of it maybe not as heavy going as well, because there's also some fun on this show. We do have a smile while we bring you the latest dose of depression.
More dark
Especially
humor
today's
than
word
anything.
of the week.
Yes, which is
enshittification. I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. You got the beeper.
I got the beeper. Are you ready? Enshittification.
But it was within moments of putting it in the title. I then found out it was Macquarie's Dictionary Word of the Year for 2024. So we're right on the pulse.
Wow.
Well, there you go, man.
Yeah.
Did you say word of the year, or did it start with a T?
Right. Okay, gotcha. David Coe's here. Hello, David. Thank you for joining us and for sharing the show too. Appreciate it. My climate courage buddy.
Yeah, that's a good show you guys are doing.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, no, you're putting in the miles. By the way, anybody who's watching this and not watching the other show, we do this show every other week, and in between every other show, the Climate Courage show goes out as well. And that's where Andrea takes on the entire show on basically climate situations with two clever people about the whole idea of, they have very clever ideas about how to try and solve the problem. I haven't been following as much, but have they made any headroom on buying Esso and buying all the fuel companies so they can change the way they do business?
I wouldn't say headway, but they're certainly fighting for it. David's about to publish a new book where he's going to talk about it a lot more too. It's called Thrive. So, yeah. Look, we're just got to get the ideas out there and just got to get people starting to think about it. But, there's this fear, because one of the focuses is, what can we do, right? And there's so much that we can all do, but there's this fear of we're going to be living like cavemen. Have you heard that? But the reality is, if we don't do it, we'll be living like cavemen. But if we do it, so we've been stripping back our life for years now, and there's joy in simplifying your life. There's massive joy in it, and I'm not living in a cave. I've got a house and a garden. I'm drinking my tea with my fresh mint plucked from the garden in it, in Singapore. Not everyone has that opportunity, right? So, it's just about it's about being conscious about how you live and what you take.
Yeah. Well, it is a problem with the monkey with the nut in hand, right? I think that's how you trap a monkey, right? You put it in a place where the monkey grabs hold of it, can't let go because he doesn't want to let go of it. I think we are in a similar kind of situation with our creature comforts. We think that if we let go, we won't have, right? And that's the big challenge we've got.
Just step by step, just make the first decision, then the next one, but do it quickly now.
Yeah. So today's topic, which we'll get to in a while, is about the shittification or the enshittification. That's a very grammatical way of saying it.
No, you're right.
Can you hear us okay?
I feel like it's everybody else.
No, we're fine.
I don't know if the broadcast has only me.
All right, Joe, keep going. See if he...
Yeah, no, I was saying about that. The theme is about the enshittification of things, and also on the other side of it, the denial that can come along with dealing with that. Is that something that do we cope with it till we don't have to worry about it? And is that a valid way to respond? We'll have a bigger chat about that. But we start this week with an update. Simon Cowell apparently is dead, or at least he was. It's the kind of update you'll get on the internet. There was a claim that was made on a Facebook page, very well done actually, in terms of the kind of post that would be shared, that Simon Cowell was involved in a car crash. Lots of reactions of that to that news, of course. And he spoiled the whole thing by showing up at a funeral. I mean, the story of the funeral, of course, not as funny as well. One of the members of One Direction passed away due to a fall, an accident of some sort, and but definitely proved that Simon Cowell was not dead. But it also proved very much so that the internet is a place where things get passed on very quickly. Reactions are given very quickly before they even are verified. So yeah, they had a lot of people on the hook, believing that Simon Cowell had passed away, and they expressed their condolences, or at least shared something about that they had to. I think what happens on the internet is you try to attach yourself to some piece of news in some kind of meaningful way as quickly as possible, and at least 21,000 people did that.
Yeah. So hint: go and do a Google search. Not a chat GPT, because it uses too much energy. Go and do a Google search. Is Simon Cowell dead? And it'll tell you. It's really as simple as that, because it's still popping up. Have you seen it on Facebook? It's kind of everywhere. It's
well, what I did was I did a survey of people. So it depends on your feed, really. And I don't go on Facebook that often, so I don't see that much on Facebook. But I asked around and said, "Have you heard this news?" My young'uns did not. My wife hadn't. So it's pretty interesting. They heard more about the One Direction, Liam Payne's passing from One Direction, than they had heard about any news about Simon Cowell passing.
Yeah, right. Okay. Anyway, it's a spam thing, so just report as spam. David said, enshittification, even production on Shine and Temu are getting more shittier. Perfect for Black Friday. So, yeah. Put your credit cards away, guys. Okay, there's a really great story out of Scotland. If you've been to Scotland in the last few years, you'll notice that they're on a massive rewilding campaign, and it's really beautiful to see. And its bumblebee population in one area has increased 116 times. So it's called Rewilding Denmark Field. It's a 90-acre project based just north of Perth, and it has been working to restore nature for just 2 years. And in 2021, there was only 35 bumblebees reported, and they do a lot of that civilian reporting sort of data to capture these numbers. And after just 2 years, it's increased to 4,056. And the diversity of the bumblebee has also doubled from 5 to 10. So it's just a really good example that if we put the work in, and, you know, the diversity is what we should be focusing on, and rewilding. If we can do it, we can get pretty instant results. We saw it during COVID as well. I saw the coral reefs coming back to life just directly off the beach from Phuket, you know, and they're probably all trashed again by now. Anyway, Tim?
Well, here's a story about not putting the work in and still doing really well. So it's a bit of a crazy story. It's in Romania. Far-right pro-Russian candidate has taken a surprise lead in the first round of Romania's presidential election. Ultra-nationalist Călin Georgescu won 23% of the vote, followed by center-right candidate Elena Lasconi of the Save Romania Union and populist Social Democrat Prime Minister Marcel Ciolacu, the only pre-election favorite. Georgescu has no party of, this is the guy that's leading. He has no party of his own. He only entered the campaign in October last month, and he's principally campaigned on TikTok. So the victory of Georgescu, who campaigned under the slogan "Restore the dignity of the Romanian nation," has been warmly welcomed in Russian media, and protests have been ongoing since. I wonder how he's doing so well.
Yeah, and off the back of Georgia as well.
Yeah.
That is democracy in action, isn't it? There's an article in The Guardian that starts with there is a galaxy far, far away. It's not far that there. I beg your pardon. There isn't a galaxy that's far, far away enough where women can escape sexist online trolls. This refers to Emily Calandrelli becoming the 100th woman to go into space with Blue Origin. That's the aerospace company owned by Jeff Bezos. When she came back to Earth, they released a video of that on social media, and it was flooded pretty soon by hateful, objectifying remarks. So Blue Origin has since removed the video to the trolling, but Emily has reposted it and come back with a bit of she did a bit of a comeback, and referring to something about little men. So
Mhm.
I'm a little bit two minds about it. But part of it is I'm glad that she's not being held down by what has been done, but I'm a little bit disappointed that it comes with a kind of a slap back. So it's one of those things like, well, they did it first. So yeah.
I don't know. You're not a female on social media, so I think a slapback's. Yeah. Well, talking about slapbacks, the Mexican president has clapped back at Trump over tariffs this week, and it's been quite a beautiful thing to watch. So President Claudia Sheinbaum, so she's a climate scientist, and basically she said 70% of illegal weapons seized from criminals in Mexico come from your country. We do not produce these weapons, nor do we consume synthetic drugs. Tragically, it is in our country that lives are lost to the violence resulting from meeting the drug demand in yours. She said, claiming that Mexico has seized tons of various types of drugs, 10,340 firearms, and have detained 15,640 individuals for violence related to drug trafficking. And she's also talked a lot about what they've done to stop people crossing the border, and the numbers are significantly down. So that was quite an interesting little spat this week, and we've seen some very different representations of the follow-up conversation between Trump and the president of Mexico this week. So that was interesting. Keeping with the women's theme, right?
Disturbing one. This is pardon.
Keeping with the female theme.
What was that? Is she frozen? I think she's frozen. Joe, you haven't frozen.
No. Well, I'm still on. I can hear both of you. So
yeah, I can hear you. I can't hear Andrew at the moment.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Andrew was saying we're just staying with the women's theme, going on to your story about global femicide.
Okay. Well, I'll do my story then. So yeah, this one's a little bit disturbing. And anyway, it's from The Guardian. According to a UN global femicide report, home is the most dangerous place for women, the place where they should feel the safest. But of the 85,000 women killed by men in 2023, 60% died at the hands of a partner or a family member. That's just appalling. An estimated 140 women and girls across the world die at the hands of their partner or family member every day. 140 women a day. We are in the months-long global campaign against violence against women and girls, with protests and marches across the world. It is getting worse, and the need to address this once and for all is huge. We just need to do it. I mean, actually, when you think back to COVID, that was the scariest time for a lot of women, because they were locked in the house with possibly abusive partners, or at least partners that had the potential for that abuse. And then, of course, with the tensions rising because of being confined to such spaces, those abuses were rampant. I remember doing a series of interviews with a domestic violence expert back then, with tips on what to do if you're caught in that situation, but also tips for employers dealing with perpetrators as well as victims of domestic abuse, because the perpetrators sometimes also reach out for help as well. We can't forget, but we've got to be able to spot when women are in that situation. They don't want to speak up about it too, because that becomes very dangerous for them as well. It can exacerbate the problem too. So yeah, it's shocking.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I could hear you the whole time.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found, so first of all, in a pandemic, and we're about to talk about another potential pandemic, the first thing that should happen is anybody who's convicted of committing violence towards their partner should be removed from the house before lockdown starts. So number one. But the other thing that really shocked me about COVID was there are all of these reports of men who've never ever lifted a finger against their partner who basically became domestic abusers. So men in fear is obviously a thing that we need to be addressing, and I think it's a bigger problem in the world, and we're not recognizing it. I think it links to a lot of things. So
yeah, we'll talk about mental health in a little bit later in the show.
Yeah.
But yeah, men in fear is definitely one of them, and men also feeling like they can never attain a level that society has told them is expected of them, which never ever was.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. Should we get into the bigger pieces?
Yeah, let's get to the bigger pieces. So if you've been following this show, you've been witness to this. Basically, Andrea's been like the kid in the back seat going like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And she's been referring to bird flu. You know, are we there yet? Should we raise the alarms? Okay, so I am still driving the car, still looking back and saying like, no, not quite, but it's not looking that good. So what's been happening with bird flu, especially in the US, is actually causing some great concern around the rest of the world. And the reasons are wrapped around actually more the politics of it. So let's talk a little bit, first of all, about the science of bird flu. Where it is currently is bird flu still is not jumping directly to humans that easily. Right? That's the scientific part of it. But what it is it's finding more and more ways to get across, not because it's going directly from the birds into human beings, but it's going through the third route. So in the US right now, you're probably hearing about things like bird flu virus showing up in milk, showing up, I think, especially in the milk of infected cows. Right now, let's talk a little bit first of all about the virus and whether it can move to humans very easily. It actually takes quite a little bit of exposure before that happens. It's very, very unlikely that you get a low exposure and then get infected by that. But if you're open to prolonged exposure, and that can come about in things in roles where, for instance, you are working on a bird, a farm, a chicken farm. Maybe you're involved in the culling of that as well. I was surprised to learn that about 100 million birds have been culled in the U.S. in relation to avian flu. But those people involved in that process have been exposed as well. Some of them have picked up the virus, and that's what they presume is the way that's happened. So the first part is about infection. The other part, of course, is you can also get infected with exposure to the milk. So people who are involved on the farms, who are involved in milking sometimes, and they get shot in the eye with milk, infected milk, that becomes conjunctivitis. And conjunctivitis is one of the ways that avian flu manifests as well, right? Now, the next bit is about evolving a flu that actually is going to spread from one to the other. So historically speaking, that hasn't happened many times. There's been one case in Mexico where there's some evolution and the bird flu there became capable of jumping from human to human. But right now, it hasn't quite happened yet. Although, as the news currently is, there are more cases that have come up where there's been infection of human beings with the bird flu. And like I said before, where it's coming from tends to be about that exposure to the animal, intermediary animals. Now, what's tricky and what's scary about the way viruses work is this. There is, first of all, the idea that, and this came from a infectious diseases expert that I had the pleasure of watching a few days ago, talking about how the virus sometimes plays genetic mahjong. Right, it goes into a host, and then it kind of plays around with all the genetic material, and then comes up with a new variant. And then so you have a changing virus in the way it behaves. And what we are very concerned about, of course, is that one of these days that variant is going to come out where it is going to be spreadable from person to person. So that's number one. The other thing that could happen, which is quite scary, is that this variant, let's say it still also continues to infect birds. So this variant that now can infect human beings gets into birds. travels with the migratory patterns of these birds as they travel around the world. So that is the kind of combination that we're quite concerned about. Now, that is one part of it. Now, the political part of it is what I think many people are concerned about, and that's the fact that some of these things can be mitigated, and that would be in the form of vaccinations for the herds, the cattle, as well as birds. And the strangest thing about things is that it's because of politics that isn't actually happening, that the birds aren't being immunized against it, that the cows or the cattle aren't being immunized against it, vaccinated against that, because of some of the rules that are in place for the export of such things. So, ironically, meat that's exported, the agreements that are in place actually preclude them from vaccinated heads of cattle. Similarly, in terms of birds as well. So the health authorities in the US are quite perplexed by this, because that would be the smarter thing to do, right? So the analogy that I shared with Andrea before is like they're quite happy with the fact that they're quite prepared. So in terms of being prepared for a human outbreak or whatever it is, they've got vaccines in place. They're far better prepared than they were for COVID. They have ways to detect the disease. They have some vaccine plans. They have the antivirals already in place should that happen. So you can think about that as having a seatbelt, right? But because of what they're doing elsewhere in the policies around exporting of meat and milk and eggs and all that kind of stuff, they're driving fast. So they've got the seatbelt on, but they haven't slowed down the car. So that's what's happening, and that's why a lot of people who are in health are a little concerned about it. It is, not time to say to Andrea, we're there, but it is getting a little bit more dangerous. Yes.
All right. So based on what I've been saying, because I know that you've been listening to the scientists, so sometimes scientists are conservative and they're a little bit behind the news, right? Just science, typically, right? So one is all of the waste centers in California are detecting the virus now. The story in Canada is about one teenage boy that's in critical care, and they sequenced the virus, and it's done what it does. And I think at least 3 cases somewhere in the States, I think it's California, but I could be wrong. There's no link to animals. So, and then of course the other big risk is if pigs get the virus, which they have, and we talked about that a while ago, because it's usually, I mean, the flu that we deal with every season, that comes from pigs historically, right? So, are you seeing? Did you hear any of that? And when you said about the vaccine, so my understanding is that there isn't a vaccine, and that the flu vaccine only works like for 20%. But so there is a vaccine. Is it for animals or is it for humans?
There are vaccine solutions that are for the animals that can give you some protection from that. And so, like Norway actually has rolled out a vaccination program for people who are at risk, the people who are involved in livestock. So they have what they call an H5N8 vaccine. So that covers the H5 range of viruses. It doesn't, the usual thing about vaccines is it does not protect 100% of the time, but it's again a better thing. It is actually protecting those people who are exposed. So yes, the answer is there are vaccination solutions, not fully developed. I mean, like they're not specifically developed for this particular strain, but for the H5 family in general, there are mitigations that can be put in place.
Okay, and the 50% death rate from the virus. What are the scientists saying about that?
Okay, so that particular stat has been contested in terms of like it's the bias of the sample, so that it's a higher rate than it should be. But actually, if you think about it purely from a virus, from a viral statistic perspective, right? Having a virus that has that sort of a mortality rate is actually, and this take a helicopter view of things, is actually good because it won't spread. right? Because
Yeah,
if
right.
it's killing the hosts, it will not have a chance to spread person to person. So that's the
Yeah.
big thing. But again, if there's an external force that can come in, I mean, like every single bird around you is carrying the deadly flu, then you don't need a person to bring that to you. But that's a worst case scenario. I don't want to say that's anywhere close to where we are. But those are the kinds of things that keep people up at night. Why we're concerned about, why I say we, why they're so concerned about swine is that inside the pig, because what the pig has, or what, and that's shared by bats as well, is they have a wider array of receptors, genetically speaking, or in the body system, so that it's actually able to do a lot more transactions with these viruses. So the ultimate genetic mahjong can happen inside the pig, and that's what they're really concerned about. The health, like I said, public health people want to see more being done in the other side of things, which is about the food business that is going on, all the farming that goes on, because that's not inside of public health. So the great concern that they have, politically speaking, as well, is that the people who are working in many of these places, in the US especially, probably fall into the category of people who now feel very, very insecure about their position in society. A lot of them, maybe some of them may be illegals, unregistered, and some of them may not be so sure about their position as well, and what they're entitled to. So they may or may not have access even to the public health that would help them detect if such a thing was happening. So these are the dangers that they're kind of playing with in the US currently. So I can only assure you that as far as the doctors and medical people are concerned, they're more ready for stuff that's happening. But the politics is certainly what's screwed up right now.
Yeah, and obviously with Trump coming in after his last pandemic handling. All right, so I'm getting the message. Stay calm, right? And the fact that we're not hearing about it in other parts of the world apart from Canada, is there anything else going on? Do you know?
No, there are other health public health institutions are concerned about this. They definitely have put orders in there. I think I don't remember the number, but I think Europe has also put in kind of options on vaccinations and stuff like that. So they're getting prepared for something like that. Everybody wants to be prepared and not at the same time have to pull the trigger, because it's a very fine balance. Because if you once you do, I mean, it's a whole kettle. It's a whole problem again, right? Because right now, if you think about where the world is, and this is legitimately a problem. If you think COVID only had health implications, I'm going to give you a little bit of a different perspective here. The change in governments around the world, actually, you can lead them back mostly to what happened because of COVID, not directly because of the disease, but because of what happened as people dealt with COVID. So as governments dealt with COVID, there were all kinds of social issues, the political issues, and then the economic issues as well. And inflation is the one thing that's really, really driven populations into the hands of strong arm leaders and all these right wing leaders, right?
Yeah.
So that is something you can kind of take back to COVID. So are we prepared for something? I won't say similar, but we've got to take it seriously for a number of bigger reasons as well. It's really hard for people to think seriously about trying to keep a disease, any kind of disease, at bay right now. But I was just listening again to medical professionals discussing things. We're not done with COVID. COVID's not done with us. And this particular, the avian infection, they're calling it an outbreak already in the animals. It is something to keep an eye on, definitely.
Yeah. And then you look at, with climate change, the movement of species north and south. And now there's all of these thousands of interactions between species that never crossed paths before, and the risks of pandemics from that, right? So I think it's going to be a reality in our future. But stay calm and practice good hygiene, right?
Yeah. So again, to put it into perspective, right? When you think about the genetics of everything, it's like there's certain parts that just don't fit with other parts. So bird flu doesn't fit with us that easily yet. But if you keep on putting pressure and constantly exposing ourselves to it, there is a possibility that something gets through and there's a minor infection. First of all, there's a whole thing before you get a full blown secondary infection. You can get some minor kind of infections. That's why they have the conjunctivitis indicators as well. You can have a situation where the virus enters the system and your body is reacting to it, but it hasn't had a full blown infection, and that kind of thing can happen as well. So the good news right now is you coming into contact with bird flu isn't likely to cause you to catch the bird flu. That's currently where it stands, and just because of the way it tends to happen, it's still quite unlikely. Again, famous last words.
Mm. No, it's interesting. All right, so let's move on. I'm just going to do a sort of trying to capture a lot of environmental stuff that's been happening in the last couple of weeks. It looks like Tim's sitting back, so StreamYard's obviously not playing ball today. But anyway, so COP29 finished since our last show, and it was the finance COP. So $300 billion has been promised to developing nations to help with adaptation, which includes obviously more renewables. So this number's a joke. And we also need to remember this number will probably never see the light of day because past promises haven't been delivered on. And most of it's being offered as loans to developing nations who obviously, they can't afford any more debt than they've already got. But it's this mindset that it's a charity that I think we all need to sort of really get our heads around, because if we're really serious about moving forward and we're really serious about addressing emissions, it's critical that we help every country on this planet move away from emissions. So just for example, if India keeps increasing its coal use, which it is, then we're all toast, right? Because they're going to have to run their air conditioners for a lot longer as it gets hotter. And we're seeing, the horrible situation that's going on there in the last few weeks with the pollution. China is actually looking to reach peak coal within the next sort of 12 months. So this is good news, right? But while China's going in that direction, and we've seen the unbelievable amount of investment in renewable technology in China, the rest of Asia and the rest of the global south is investing more and more in the dirty pollutants, especially in coal, because it's the cheapest, right? So it's not a charity. We need to be able to invest in these countries to get them off these polluting emissions fuels, right? At the same time, there's another UN summit happening in South Korea, and this is the final round to agree a global plastics treaty. And, oh God, these things, here's what's happening. There's a record number of plastic industry lobbyists attending. 220 fossil fuel and chemical industry representatives are at that summit. Now, that's the biggest delegation of the talks, because basically the EU and each of its member states, their memberships are 141 representatives, and Korea's got 140. So they've got 220. So for all those people out there that don't believe in climate change is caused from emissions, I'm not going to convince you otherwise, but hopefully you cannot ignore the amount of plastic that's in our environment that we can all see with our own eyes. And if all you have to do is come to any country in the global south, whether you visit or live, apart from Singapore, of course, and you'll see the land, beaches, and the waterways are absolutely full of plastic. And I know because I'd spent the last 7 years picking it up. It's disgusting. It's out of control. The countries cannot manage it. They cannot manage it. And of course, you've also got to remember a lot of this waste is exported from wealthy countries in the Northern Hemisphere, as well as countries like Australia. So we know the impact of plastics and chemical pollutions now. It took a long time for that information to get the light of day. I think there was a big lobbying group making sure that didn't happen. And then recently the Stockholm Institute, which published the 9 planetary boundaries, have said that the plastics in our environment are also impacting all of the 9 planetary boundaries. So it's a really serious issue. We all know it. It's going to double. It's going to triple. It's a disaster. It's just going to keep piling up. And if this plastics treaty doesn't happen, then I think it's just criminal. So all of this is happening while we're watching all the extreme weather that's happening around the world. And of course, most of the Northern Hemisphere events are well noted. Sri Lanka's experiencing floods and landslides as well as deaths. Indonesia's just been slammed with floods and landslides. The north of Malaysia and the south of Thailand are under 3 meters of floods right now. Australia is looking to have a brutal summer. They're expecting cyclones, which is what Australia gets, fires, and of course extreme heat. They're in an extreme heat right now, and they're actually at risk of blackouts because their coal-powered stations are basically not equipped, or they've closed them down for maintenance before the hot season, so they close them down a little bit late. Places like France in November are experiencing evening temperatures of 26 degrees Celsius, which, we're seeing temperatures 10, 15 degrees above normal, and you've got to think about the impact on agriculture and nature. So this is big news, where there's a report out, I think it's in Nature or physics.org, which is talking about hot spots that are popping up all over the globe, which of course are deadly. Hurricane season has ended, and there were 11 hurricanes in 2024, which intensified by 9 to 28 miles per hour, and they strengthened over waters that were made as much as 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer due to climate change. So Beryl and Milton, which were disastrous, they don't think they could have been Category 5s without climate change. And then, of course, the other side of things, and the final point is there's this technology called DAC, direct air capture, and it's got this big promise that it's going to remove emissions from the air, and countries like the UK are putting billions of dollars into this. The problem is many climate stabilisation plans are based on questionable assumptions about the future cost and deployment of DAC, direct air capture, and therefore may not bring around these reductions. So I just want to illustrate. So if you want to remove CO2 from the air, there's a big challenge. The concentration of CO2 in the air is extremely low. It's 420 parts per million, so that's 0.04%. So if you want to remove a single ton of CO2 from the air, you need to process about 1.8 million cubic meters of air. And that's basically the equivalent of 720 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So the other thing is you need energy to run the systems to do this, and that's going to take at least 1.2 megawatt hours of electricity for each ton of CO2 removed. So it's an astronomical amount of energy. For those of us in the climate space, I obviously can't speak for everyone, I don't think anyone's shocked about what's going on. It's stupid. What's the word? Stupefying. I think many are moving stupefying, right? Many are moving into panic mode. But for people like me who've long ago moved into acceptance, it's certainly a dark humor stage. I read the news with a chuckle on a daily basis. It's just so stupid what we're seeing, because the direction that we're heading in, it's really, really crazy. So that's a bit of what's going on from an environmental perspective, and we could talk about any of that, but then Tim's going to talk about some mental health strategies to help people cope, because that's really important right now. So I don't know, have you got any questions about that?
Well, I wasn't going to ask questions, but I've just got to think about it. They've got to come up with a better way of naming things like hurricanes, because if you give them names like Milton, it just don't sound like they're going to be causing much trouble. Sorry, Milton, so watching as well.
I think they should.
The hurricane's coming again. Excuse me, I'm going to damage you for a moment. Maybe, I don't know.
I think they should name them after the fossil fuel industry companies, their CEOs and leading investors. Then they should go for the automotive industry, their CEOs, and they should go for the fast fashion industry, their CEOs, and they should just go, because there's plenty of polluting businesses, the chemical companies, Hurricane Dow, and then or the mining companies. Hurricane, what's her name? What's Gina Reinhardt? let's just put their names.
What a great idea.
Yeah,
well, I think the corollary to that, of course, is someone's going to come out with naming rights. So Hurricane Trump could be on the way.
Oh yeah,
they're all
and the politicians.
I'm the greatest hurricane. Mine has to be a classic 5.
Only if it's going towards Mar-a-Lago, right?
Yeah. Hey, I mean, this all sounds a little bit depressing. And that's kind of our next topic, a little bit about discussing mental health tips and ideas. And just to give a bit of background, mental health is a state of well-being. This is WHO's sort of definition about our ability to cope with the stresses of life. And do we have the skills, the resilience, the mental resources, the resources around us to be able to deal with it? And so it's, there's lots of studies out at the moment, but then there's a sense of skepticism or shame or even, I guess, stigma around suffering from a mental health issue as well, and that people don't like to talk about it. They feel a bit ashamed or whatever. But the challenge is that people feel stressed, and people are going to feel stressed, and they're going to, and everybody can feel there's something called eustress, spelled EU stress, which means EU as a prefix to a word means good. So presumably Europe means good rope, but eustress means means good stress, and there is a level of good stress. That's that stress that gets us to push through and do something and achieve, and maybe it's the pressure put on by a deadline that we get the thing done rather than letting something drag on, even though it can create a bit of stress. But beyond that, we get to debilitating stress. And I guess this is the mental health crisis the mental health situation, I suppose. I don't want to call it a crisis. And I don't want to call it an excuse. And I'd warn people from thinking of it as, a weakness in a particular generation, even though that is possible, that there is a generation that's finding it tougher than another generation. And I think sometimes when a generation hasn't gone through formative stresses, when they've been cotton-wooled a little bit, perhaps those stresses, their level of resilience to bigger stresses may not be there. But regardless of all of that, if somebody's feeling it, regardless of pigeonholing them in a generational sort of label, I think we need to address it. And I think we can look at some stats. I've got a couple of stats I'd love to be able to share with you. Stats from global health surveys on mental health look at Gen Z being the most concerned group for mental health, in particular the women in Gen Z, and that's globally. But if I was to look at Singapore, for example, there's a study in Singapore that's talking about mental health issues. And if you have a look at the question was, how often do you feel sad or depressed? And in the 18 to 24-year-olds, 52% of them were saying that they were feeling occasionally sad or depressed. And on the flip side, the 35 to 44-year-olds were saying 85% of them were saying they rarely feel sad or depressed. So if you look at the age group, there's a difference in perhaps either stage of life where they've actually gone through things that have been stressful and they've built resilience for it, and perhaps that younger age group is being cotton-wooled through a bit of their life. Regardless, people are going to feel stress. And if they have been cotton-wooled, then they may not have the resources, which means we as an older generation and we as a community need to be able to provide some of those resources and tools and strategies, and a listening ear, really importantly, as well, out of those stressful situations. Because you can listen to the climate stuff and you can get really gloomy because you feel like something needs to be done, and if it's not being done, you can feel overwhelmed by it, and then those stresses can be almost debilitating. But look, the numbers were really showing, and even though I gave those numbers just now about those groups feeling not as sad or depressed, it doesn't mean that they're not feeling any mental health issues at all, because they are, but in different ways. Loneliness was one of the ones about feeling a sense of loneliness as well was quite high. And I think this is something that I think we all, if we think about it, we're experiencing more and more with regards to, we're talking online. It might feel that we've got community, but sometimes we feel that significant lack of community. and community is really important. And I think
No.
in the Western world, individualism as a cultural context and a sort of self-actualizing striving of individual success and everything else can actually work against what mental health is suggesting, where community is really important. In fact, addiction studies show that with a sense of social support and social networks and community can help people overcome addiction more than anything else. And often loneliness is one of the key things that sees people spiral into those sorts of addictions too. So whereas if you look at the Eastern cultures or global South cultures, those cultures are a lot more not communal, but more community oriented, but more community oriented, called
Familial?
collectivists. Pardon?
What's that?
Familial.
Maybe familial? Familial?
Oh, familial.
Yeah,
It's familial. Yeah, familial. I mean, it's collectivism. So it's there's that, certainly there's that family structure, and maybe some of that. I mean, if you look at I would suggest there is that direct correlation between wealth of a country and familial structures, because where it's a little bit harder from the wealth side, or a bit more challenging for the wealth side, you've got families forced to live together in multi-generations, whereas where the wealth comes in, they tend to maybe find their own way, but that can actually adversely impact that. But what do we do? Regardless of where we are, regardless of if we're in an individualistic culture or whether we're in a collectivistic culture, and we live in Singapore, where there is quite a you can notice both exist here in quite a way, but we're predominantly an Asian culture here, and so that collectivism is there, but there is certainly that Western influence with regards to individualism apparent as well. There are some very simple things, but if social outlets or socializing is important, then ensuring that we have that we are proactive in being social, I think is a really important thing. I mean, for me, one of the things that gives me a lot of joy, and I can see it in my family as well, is just something as simple as, and this is, as hosting a dinner party. Even if the place can't fit, when we had a bunch of people over here and we couldn't fit the number of people that ended up turning up, but we were here anyway, and the chaos of it was wonderful. And it's that of course there's a new mental health problem there, which is the dishes, of course, afterwards. But I think something as simple as a dinner party with trusted friends, because and the reason why I say with trusted friends is because going out with your work colleagues after work is important and it's great, but we might hold some things back from our work colleagues because of the context in which self-revelation may be limited somewhat, based on career limiting moves with regards to revealing this, or performance reviews coming up, so I don't want to tell my boss that I'm feeling a little bit fragile or whatever it is. So we hold those things back. So we need those outlets, and there's a number of places that those outlets can happen. I think workplaces need to make available counseling facilities with a very strict policy that there is no reporting back as to what is discussed in those particular meetings, because otherwise people won't attend them. And there has to be some sort of reporting to a degree, because otherwise how are they going to fund it? But I think but it can't be anything to do with the details of what was happened, and possibly keeping the individuals that are turning up for those services confidential, unless they turn up over a certain number of times or whatever. There's a situation that needs to be escalated, but that requires permission of the person perhaps. But those sorts of outlets need to be there in social communities, as well as religious institutions, for example, have a great opportunity to be able to do this across religions, is to make sure that their counseling services that are available to their members, whether that's a member of a church, a mosque, a temple, whatever it is, it's available for them to come and have those sorts of conversations with people as well. And then there's just community groups and hotlines. I mean, I remember in Australia, well, there's the Samaritans or SOS that are usually around the world. I think in Australia, I was working with Lifeline when I first came out of uni, which was an anonymous phone service where people could ring up and sort of, have a chat with somebody at least about their problems, where they're getting a listening ear. But I want to go back to the dinner party. If you can have that dinner party with a group of friends and you get to the point where you can ask the question, because sometimes the first couple of dinner parties is just a sort of random, everybody talking about whatever. But if you can get to the point where the dinner party, you have a bit of a regular one, and we have one. We have games night, which is dinner, and then we have some games as well. But we get to ask the question, what's been your highlight for the last month? What's been the highlight? And everyone will have a highlight, but the important follow-up question is, what's been the biggest thing that you've been struggling with this last month? And the reason why it needs to be trusted friends is you're not going to go and say, well, I've been, I guess, thoughts of suicide was the thing, and it's just like everyone's a freak out. So it's, but if it's like, I've been having a really hard time with this, learning how to spot the red flags, I think, from leaders and from friends and from community members is a really big deal. It's to say, have you, and maybe after the dinner party where we sort of get through it, is to sort of go one-on-one with that person afterwards and do a bit of a follow-up to go, hey, how you dealing with it? Have you actually spoke to anyone about this? And really just encourage them to say it's okay, and maybe share a little bit about, I had similar sort of thoughts with a different situation a couple of years back, and I went and spoke to someone, and it just helped me get it off my chest. And so one good thing about, when you watch the TV shows over in the US, where everybody seems to have a shrink. In fact, one of the things I've been watching is a show called Shrinking. But when they all seem to have a shrink, where they go and have a chat online with somebody, have a chat with a therapist, it seemed to me like a really weird thing. But what they've made it with all of those appearances from Woody Allen shows through to today is that it's normalized going and having a chat with someone as a weekly or fortnightly or even monthly sort of routine of just sort of offloading and getting an independent, trusted, confidential opinion, or not even opinion, but listening ear that may ask you some questions that lead you in a positive direction. Could be something as well. But over here, that's not the case. It doesn't seem to be that well accepted, or it seems to be a lot more like we should all be strong enough to be able to deal with this. You should be strong enough to be able to deal with it. But I think if we can surround ourselves with those communities, friends, and just, and it involves inviting them over for dinner. It doesn't involve going out to a restaurant and doing it, because I think in a restaurant, we're not going to be as revealing as if we're sitting in somebody's home. I think when you're in somebody's home, I feel like there's a, when you step over that threshold of the door, you're stepping into somebody's embrace, in a sense, of the warmth of their home environment. And I just feel like there's an opportunity, and even in those dinner parties where there's people there that you don't want to reveal in front of, that people go home at different times. One of the things I've noticed in the culture here, though, is as soon as the first person gets up to go home, everybody goes home. And it doesn't happen that way over in Australia. Somebody goes home, it's like, okay, good on you. And I'm staying till 3 a.m. But over here, the first person to get up at 9:30, and then everyone disappears, and it's like, really? But maybe stick around a little bit going, I was just going to have a chat, and somebody else goes off, to watch the football while the other two have a bit of a chat about it, and maybe chatting in front of the football. I just think that it's just a really good way of being able to offload and share. But the reason for asking those questions, what's been great this last month, or whatever the time period was since the last time we all met up, what's been happening this last month, or what's been, how's it been going? What's been the challenging point? What's been challenging for you? Eventually people are going to start revealing once that trust is there, but the trust is required, which means it needs a frequency of turning up and showing up and having these things. I mean, in the church sphere, we've got small groups, and that I've noticed the dynamics in that sort of small group side where where it's a group of, let's say, 8 people turning up, or 8 to 10 people turning up, and they turn up every week or fortnightly or month. Our group turns up every week. And at the beginning, you're a bit cautious about what to share, but as that group grows, people are sharing stuff about their lives that is, you can sense it's traumatic. I mean, if somebody's got an illness, for example, that they share, the way that group rallies around that family to help them, and just that support of a whole group of, not strangers, but a group of people that they're not family, but they're your
Mm.
friendship family, that inner
Yeah.
circle. When they come in to do that, just the weight off it, just I don't know, it just feels that feeling of support is there. And to feel
Yeah.
supported means you don't carry the stress on your own. You still got the illness to deal with, and that's really hard. But I mean, if you're dealing with somebody with an illness, their spouse is obviously under enormous pressure as well, and managing the kids just can be really, really tough. I mean, I think we've all been through it, maybe with smaller, less life-threatening illnesses sometimes, but sometimes those life-threatening ones can be really, really tough. So I just think having that circle around, being able to call up somebody and say, hey, can we have a bit of a chat? I'm kind of feeling a bit like this, and having that availability for people is really so important. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I was just going to say AI derangement syndrome. I haven't heard that one. Have you guys heard that one?
AI
David?
derangement.
David
Okay,
Forden.
interesting.
Yeah, kind of seems to be
I
an emerging
I
thing.
thought all AI had a bit of derangement in it.
So, David, we'll have to have a look into that. David Go, you've left a couple of comments that didn't link to what Tim was saying, so I didn't put them up. But no, I look, one of my biggest takeaways when I was trying to understand how the hell the results of the US election happened is we are so disconnected from each other in every way possible, right? And we need to, I grew up in community organizations, always. The whole family was involved in these community organizations, which meant there were other adults to go and get advice from, or speak to, or the other adults paying attention. If there was one of the young people in that community didn't look like they were thriving on the home front, there was someone that potentially could notice it, right? And so we've gone to these devices where we're locked, our teenage kids are locked in their rooms, or they're dealing with heat extremes where they can't go outside anyway, so they've got to stay at home, or all those sort of things. So I think we've got to work out a way to come back together. You were talking about one of the challenges with men today, and it's a big problem. Young men are voting right, and not all right is extreme right, but a lot of young men are going that way. And they're voting in opposition to females who tend to be more liberal, right? So it's an interesting dynamic. So why? They're not feeling heard. They're not feeling listened to. So how do we bridge the gap? And I think, I'd love to see community outreach where, if you can teach young men how to do something, you see it in sports. You see it in lots of ways, but I think we've got to expand that again. Young men used to learn everything from the men in their community, and now that's not happening so much as happening as much as it used to. And I think we need to turn that one around. So especially because I think men need a place to go where they can speak and be trusted. Women tend to be better at that.
Yeah.
And I think boys and men need a place where they can go and talk and not feel ashamed of it, and not feel that those feelings, that it's not a weakness. It's,
Yeah, I find, for example, in Australia, there's a concept called the men's shed. Have you heard of that one, Andrea?
Yeah. That sort of thing.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's great. I mean, so basically that's a lot of people with all their tools and everything, and they go and put it in there and they go and build stuff. And then there's the older guys can show the younger guys how to do some stuff, and that gives people a sense of purpose as well. But also, once those relationships build, you can have a bit of a chat over something. Usually it ends up over a bit of a beer or whatever it is over there. But that I think that works on multiple levels. Actually, the stats in Singapore show that the way that most people deal with it is exercise, and if they're getting it through sporting coaching and mental, but exercise is more going for a run by yourself or with somebody else. If exercise is one of the ways to do it, I would encourage people to try and exercise with somebody else. To make sure
find community, but sometimes peace of mind. That's
sometimes
what
you need a bit of time yourself. Yeah.
I need no one talking to me.
Yeah, true.
I was about to say, in terms of like the science on mental health, is that we actually do really well when we connect back with nature. So it doesn't need to be necessarily with somebody else. It's just about just being outside. They've actually measured stuff where just seeing how the process of walking and interacting with nature, that just that idea that you're moving forward into nature and nature's passing you by, but the leaves and all that, it does something to our brains, which is really fantastic. Something else as well that I picked up in the last 24 hours as well is that they've also done studies on virtual living and how your brain deals with things, right? So even if I put you into a room and you look around and that's a real room, and I convert that room into a virtual room, and now you look around the virtual room, your IQ actually drops. Now, how that works is because your mind is always processing, and actually your mind's creating a hallucination for you to deal with the world around you. And something about virtual worlds cause a lot more processing to go into that, so that you don't have processing left to do the other kind of thinking that is not about trying to figure out what the world around you is. So it's a strange little thing. So I was listening to that about communities. I was thinking about also how sometimes it's almost like the familial societies are the ones that are more ashamed of not dealing with things, right? So I think, strangely enough, like in the US, or in New York, for instance, where it's such an individualistic place, the idea of having a therapist makes so much sense, because you need to find someone to be your person to unload with. Whereas I think and maybe in an Asian context, there's a lot of shame involved with it, as in, like, if I'm not enough to deal with things myself, these are the problems that come with adulting. I feel almost like it's a bad reflection on the family. It's like you're not brought up well, or that sort of thing that comes along with it. So there's a greater sense of one.
Do you feel that now, Joe, or are you aware of it culturally, or do you actually feel that, or a bit of both?
I think what keeps Asian societies going as what they are is a strong sense of somebody else is watching me. I'm living up to somebody else's standards as well, right? So that is good and bad, as in, like, that can help you very easily figure out what you should do and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. There's less individualism because of that. But at the same time, that also means that I think there's a higher stigma on not knowing what to do, as in, like, the sense that the sense of mental stress, for instance, is because you go like, oh, this is too much for me, when there's a sense of what everybody should do. So there's actually a playbook that is more familiar about what should be. You're not actually lost for what you need to do. You just feel very badly about it. So I think that's a kind of difference between an Asian society and a Western society, where in a Western society, it's a lot more about, go out there and be your own thing and be as individual and as different from everybody as possible. Whereas I think there's a slight slant on the Asian, I won't say slight, I'll say there's more of a slant on the Asian side to go, like, be like everyone, because that's safe.
Yeah, I would. I mean,
people should understand. I was just going to say, people should understand that Joe's lived for long periods of time in both the different types of cultures that he's referring to. So he's not an outsider making an opinion. He's lived both. Right?
Yeah. I feel that, I think part of the stress that a lot of young people have is, I think one of them is that, from the individualism side anyway, if you're going out there to make it on your own in blah, 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 without any sort of mentor or patriarchal figure or maternal figure, I mean, saying you're going to live up to this means there is no standard set for you, which means you look to the world as what the world's standard has set for you. And the world's standard is artificially high because we are watching a curated online world of people's best, and we are looking up to superstar idols as to what is supposed to be a norm. And I think going back to the domestic violence topic, I think some of the challenges from the domestic violence side is that men are feeling so powerless to be able to reach or provide or get to the level because they're being kept down by whatever prejudice or organizational hierarchy or whatever it is. And it gets to this breaking point where they come out and exert power that's been taken from them in those places in their families. And it's not right for them to do that. But I think that that's what's happening. And they take power over those weaker in their family, and they're so frustrated that it comes out. It just doesn't take a lot to tip them off. And you know, there's a certain, I mentioned this on the show once before, that time where I went out to India and we're looking at the Women's Leadership Conference and everything else. And we're looking at how to help women in small villages lead within the village council, because the law was you now have to have female representation in those councils. And what they'd found in the past was that the women were able to once they were trained to be able to do it, they're more likely to spend the resources, the financial resources of the village, looking at village infrastructure, education, food, housing, wells, that sort of stuff. Whereas the men would spend some of those resources, if the harvest was bad, for example, or they had a drought go through the place, they'd spend the resources in either quite often alcohol, gambling, bribery, and possibly buying what they needed from some neighboring place that had the money. And so when you look at that and you understand it a little bit, it's not because they're idiots, but it's probably because they feel so helpless that they're spending it on gambling to try and get a quick fix, not the smartest way to do it. They're spending it on drinking, which is escapism, and they're spending it on bribery, which is trying to work the system or buying the resources from somewhere else. And obviously you lose at gambling and you're adding drinking and you go home, you're feeling even worse, you know. And violence in some cultural and religious doctrines, weirdly enough, is acceptable, weirdly enough, in the home. And I think we need to help our men from a violence perspective. I really do think we need to help our men come to a place where it's okay to seek help, and it's not a sign of weakness. In fact, it's a sign of strength that you are able to realize that I need some help with this and I need to talk to somebody who can help me. And I think if we give that, if that message is out there, that you're strong, the strong person seeks help from wisdom, then I think you're going to find a lot of people are able to manage it better.
I think something I would add to that as a female, one of the things I always notice in men is the expectations they have on themselves that were either put there by somebody else or just their understanding of what is expected of them as men based on societal expectations. And anywhere you go in the world, you see it in men. And
which is what?
To be the provider, to take care, to, you know, all of and you know, there's a big percentage of blokes who don't feel that way. They've shaken that mantle off, and they live more collaborative with their partner, and they share the responsibility, all of that sort of stuff. But there's a very, very large percentage of men who don't feel that way, and they can't shake it off. To me, it almost feels like Catholic guilt. They hold on to it no matter what. And I think we've got to recognize it. We've got to respect it, if we can help them not carry that burden, because it is actually a damaging burden, but we've got to recognize it, we've got to see it, we've got to understand it, and we've got to understand how it manifests, because I think it's a part of the big problem. So the topic is denial and enshittification. So the original, may as well move into the theme, and we can sort of extend this into the theme, I think. So the original idea with enshittification was that it's talking about a service, a technology service that you buy, and it's good to begin with, and then it gets really crap, right? So I've got an example of that, elink.io. I'm going to name them, and I don't ever name brands. That's what I deliver my weekend reads through. So it's really important to me, right? It's really, really important to me. I've sent 9 messages over the last month. The first couple of messages, they replied and said, we can't see this problem. We've never seen this problem. So they can't fix it. Let's set up a call, which is at like 2 o'clock in the morning, my time. I've gone back to them. I've sent them 9 messages, and they're just ignoring me now. This is a paid service, right? And so to me, it's a classic example of enshittification as far as it was initially defined, but it's been expanded now to include climate change, basically societal breakdown. And the idea is from now on, everything's going to get worse, right? And if you understand that, then you also understand the ramifications that come with that. Men are going to get angrier. Men are not going to be able to deliver. Men are not going to be able to meet their needs or the needs of their families. They're not going to be able to thrive. Keir Starmer's offering growth and jobs, and it's like, yeah, that's great. But in the era of enshittification, you're not going to be able to deliver that, because unless you factor in the real risks to society, and they've just gone through that massive storm Bert, right? There's real risks going on that is going to impact their society. So I think we've got to start having political leadership, the whole US election. We're going to have this, we're going to have that. And it's like, no, you're not. No, you're not, because all those extreme weather events are wiping out all of your crops, and you're going to get rid of all of these people who actually pick the fruit and vegetables that are remaining. And so you're going to be seeing you're going to be seeing inflation. All the tariffs are going to be added to it. You're not going to have the people to do it. You're going to have crops rotting in the field, blah, 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 blah. So, that's one of the things that on the denial front. So David said something earlier about there's extreme weather in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment, which is freezing cold weather. And sometimes I'll have someone commenting on one of my posts going, I thought it was global warming. And you're like, oh, please don't be a moron. Like, when you understand this, I'm not unkind, but when you understand what climate change means, it means it's going to go haywire. So it can be extremely cold, which the North America's got some mega storm coming through over Thanksgiving and dumping lots of snow. South Korea is experiencing a snowstorm the likes they've never seen in November. It's the third worst in history, right? So that's kind of where we are. And enshittification, I think it's a word of our time, and therefore the word of the year for Macquarie. So, but yeah, let's be honest. Not just with ourselves, not just with our families, not just within our communities, but let's be honest about where we are and what it means, so that we can start to build the societies that we need with the strength that they need. So if we keep having political leaders that keep creating distrust in the media, distrust in the institutions, distrust in education, it's just going to make everything worse. So we've got to build that core of trust with each other, with the communities, and with the institutions. So I think it's Chad. Yeah. What do you guys think? Who's next?
Well, I was going to say about the concept behind enshittification. I think is a little bit different. How we've kind of hijacked it, I think, for our purpose here. But I think it's that thing that happens whenever you start something simple, and then complications build on that simplicity, and that winds you up, and you finally end up in a place where you cannot grow or evolve without something giving, something breaking, something not quite working, right? So that's really kind of the challenge that we have for many of the grand solutions that we have. If we say we will just do this, and you go like, if you just do that and you keep on doing that, then you end up with some other consequences somewhere else as well. So it just kept reminding me of the time when I used to do coding, right? I used to be a long time ago. I won a programming contest, but it was back in secondary school days, so it didn't make any difference really to my life.
Always
But
knew
it
you
just
were
made
a
me feel
dork.
good. Yeah. So I did some programming, and as the thing about programming is, as you program, you realize you're creating some rules, some ideas of how to make something work, and then as you add on additional features and rules, you're actually kind of causing jams in other areas. So that's all the whole thing about debugging as well. And as things get bigger and bigger and bigger, it gets more and more complex. So like I think the U.S. government, the U.S. itself, the whole thing has gone through that from that early start with the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution and stuff like that. It evolved and developed and basically has gone through that process as well. So you have a situation where there are too many agencies, there are too many rules trying to deal with too many things. We have too many interests, so that you can. So like we talked about, for instance, the health side isn't working along with the politics side in terms of what it means. Trade versus health, for instance, becomes something it's not unified, right? That's the kind of thing that happens as the systems evolve. They kind of not. The other day I was talking to somebody about relationships, right? How couples can grow either together or apart, right? And that's sometimes what happens is when you're growing and you don't come back and you get together again to go, this is where we are and this is the center that we're growing around. Yeah, both sides grow, but they tend to grow in different directions. So there is this overall growth, and then there's an unrecognizable kind of relationship that's left behind. So that's what I think we kind of face, because we are working very much at trying to be individuals, and it's very. And if you compare again, not that I want to make this about cultural things as well, but there's a reason why Asian cultures have kind of wound up where they are, because there is more of that going on. There is a strong arm perspective on that, as in there's a more dominant sort of imposition of ideas and values. But at the same time, it just does mean that there's more of that coming together and doing things together. It does not mean that, of course, that they're immune to that. They have their own issues that come out of that as it gets more complicated, right? As you are in an authoritarian situation, you solve big problems, but at a smaller scale, you do have other problems that are just going to come up anyway. Like the world we live in right now, with social media under authoritarian situations, means you have a lot of people who are unhappy under that situation for various reasons. And it's something that sort of system can't really fully address, right? It can't. An authoritarian system just cannot address the individuals sufficiently or satisfactorily, right? So it's the limitation of the big idea. So the same way, democracy basically is coming up. It's against its own limitations, right? How do you try and do the greater thing and the greater good for everybody with the interest of everybody in mind, when at the same time you have a few people, or you have a majority actually in this case, who feel no, that grand idea isn't what we want to go for, and the system itself actually allows them to say, well, we'll change it.
David's just made an interesting, I'll just put it back up, and just two non-confrontational questions. And they're actually two questions I love asking, at the end of a podcast, when they say, is there any question you wish we asked you? For me, it's what have you been thinking about a lot lately, or what's been occupying your brain space? Because they open up connections without threat. That's what David just said, and I totally agree with him. And you never know what's going on in my brain on any week. The other thing I find with people is, a lot of people want to talk to me about their beliefs about what's going on in the world because they know that I'm paying attention to it, right? So, and I get a lot of people who are giving me conspiracy theories. They're following people who I listen to, you know, they're that 1% versus the 99% of scientists, those sort of opinions. And I respect people's right to listen to them. Often they'll share something with me, and when I share something back, they say, "Oh, I'm not listening to that." I'm like, "Yeah, well, I listened to the person you recommended. Come on, you know, it's a deal, isn't it?" You know. But one of the things that I say often is, that's not my understanding of what's going on in the world, you know, and that's a really interesting thing, because it's not saying you're wrong. It's
Yep.
saying that's not my understanding. And then they'll say either, oh, well, share what your understanding is, or can I share more about why I've come to these conclusions? So trying not to be non-confrontational in your language, like, oh, you're wrong, you're an idiot, you're a moron, that sort of stuff never works, right? No one likes to be called it. We all get that. And there's a lot of that talk at the moment, and I don't blame people, especially Americans, for it. Because, you know, some of the stuff I'm seeing on social media from American to American after the Trump versus the not Trump voters, it's very, very aggressive. And I get it. Like, I understand it, but I don't know. How do you heal that? It's so angry now. And, you know, Thanksgiving. Here's tips for Thanksgiving: how to sit around the table with the Trump supporting uncle. You can't even imagine that, right? Living in a country that's that divided and that angry with each other, and they're furious with each other, you know. And it's interesting, right?
I think the challenge really is to view each other in a slightly different perspective, right? I mean, I think looking at someone as far right, looking at somebody else as far left, that's where you have that kind of issue. I mean, I remember as I told you how I wasn't infiltrating, I was actually exploring, right? The mega universe, trying to go into
Yeah,
groups
right.
that were talking about stuff, right? Well, you know, they were nice people. They really were nice people. As in, like, you can imagine ultra right wing, you can imagine ultra left wing, but there are
Yeah,
actually a whole bunch of people who are actually down the middle, right? So the
exactly.
people who can't imagine why women would vote for Trump, for instance, right? And then I mean, but the perspectives that I heard were like things like, well, you have women who are voting for they're voting for their sons. They're voting for some of the old-fashioned ideas that they have about being able to be a man, a provider, to be able to be free, to not overcompensate for things, to make life simpler. They are concerned about their sons growing up in a world where they can't say what they have to say. They have to watch everything that they do, and they've had a different experience, right? They've lived in a world where it kind of went all right. They personally weren't upset the way the left says you have to be upset about people saying the wrong thing. People say a slightly things that used to be just inappropriate and maybe a bit funny from the weird uncle become unacceptable comments from the far
Yeah,
right, right?
yeah. The cancel culture,
And
right?
again, yeah, so that sort of thing makes, you know, like if you talk about mental health, for instance, you know, the idea of the heightened anxiety of walking around. I mean, I remember in my day being interested in someone, you know, from the office, and you know, trying to figure out from maybe their secretary or their PA whereabouts they'd be at a certain time, so that I could
Well, you'd be a
coincidentally be there
stalker
as
today.
well. I'm a stalker. Well, I've got to say, even back then, because the person involved actually had grown up in America, she was pretty much convinced that I was a stalker, and
Oh,
it affected our relationship for a while as friends. But you know, that's the kind of thing that I think gets amplified,
You're
and
at her
then you
window
go,
at night going, "I'm not a stalker."
"Yeah, I'm not, yeah, I'm not a stalker." It was all the little
uh,
notes that said, "I'm not stalking you."
I got
Surprising
stalked once.
person.
It's very creepy. It's the weirdest
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Well, you
Yeah.
know, I just want to say I've had mine as well. So there you go. But
No.
I
uh,
stalk myself.
but you know, it's about that. It's about that world we want to live in terms of a simpler, sometimes simpler, quieter, you know, world where if you're in that particular space at that particular time, and you have come from a different time, right? then you go like, yeah, then it used to be a lot simpler. And someone comes along saying, yeah, we're gonna be more of that, versus somebody else who seems to represent, no, we're gonna make it more complicated for you, right? So that's the kind of thing that I'm actually sympathetic to. I
Yeah.
understand where they're coming from, and I
I
feel for them actually.
totally do. I totally do. I think the whole cancel culture went too far. I always say it leaves no room for sort of grace or growth, because okay, you say the wrong thing, you get caught out, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, and I've seen it many times. I'm like, hey mate, that's, and I'll say it to my kids all the time, come on, and then they're like, oh, okay, that's not an appropriate thing to say in public, so they don't. Whereas it's like, you're blocked, that's it, you're gone, you're destroyed, your career's done. No, come on, that's just bloody stupid. Like when you think about I think I've talked about it before, the early feminist movement went so extreme, but what happened was then there became a middle ground for women to be feminists, right? Even if they didn't call themselves one. So I think sometimes you've got to go extreme. And I think we've been on this big sort of swinging back and forth about what's appropriate within our societies. I do think the culture war became a Republican talking point and a part of their I think it was not greenwashing, part of their gaslighting. I do think that there is a level of appropriateness that we should be expecting from each other. I think we all work really hard to say what we think without being intentionally insulting. So I think I think there is an onus on us to be mindful of the words that come out of our mouths, whether in written words or So I don't think we should be saying that's gone.
Yeah,
Tim?
and I would add something to that. This ultra sensitivity to being offended by everything, I think, plays on a person's mental health. The one that's being sensitive plays on their mental health to the point where it can be damaging. And like you said, we're not allowing that space for grace. We're also not allowing that space for apology and forgiveness if we cancel, which means forgiveness. You don't have to forgive them because you've canceled them. And I think from a mental health perspective, the art of forgiveness is extraordinarily important, because otherwise you're storing up that anger inside of you, and it eventually manifests in some horrible thing going on in your life somehow. And so I can't remember if I told the story about I mentioned something about typhoid, and then somebody goes, my grandparents died of typhoid, and as if I was supposed to sort of retract everything. And then I sort of said, well, yeah, but I did have typhoid because I did that, because I ate the chewing gum that was under the cinema seat as a 4-year-old. And and then they were shocked.
Are we allowed to say moron in this particular case?
Yeah, you are.
Not as a 4-year-old.
Well, yeah, because a moron is a person with a mental capacity of, I think, a 5 or 12-year-old or something like that. I think an idiot is 12-year-old, and moron might be 5-year-old. So I'll take that as a compliment, being a 4-year-old. But anyway, so but yeah, that was not the smartest thing to have done. And then this person sort of went, oh, okay, and sort of retracted a little bit. But it was like having this heightened sensitivity about, you know what I mean? About something that's in my sphere, that I own it, and you are not allowed to step on it. It's my pain, and don't minimize or marginalize my pain. It's just like, I think
it's very confronting.
It's a mistake.
Yeah.
It's a mistake to go.
And women are worse at it than men. That cut you down. You're like, oh, for God's sake, get over yourself. Like seriously, I can't tell you the amount of times it's happened, because I talk about all sorts of things, right? And someone will come in and they'll come in there so sharp and so hard, and you're like, wow, where did that come from? Because that wasn't what I was talking about at all. And then there's you can't keep going. It's just it's done, right? That sort of stuff. I find it very disturbing when it happens.
Oftentimes that's an echo chamber conversation that's happened, and then by the time it's verbalized to the other person, it's volcanic. And because the conversation in here only has your own perspective to reflect back on. And if that perspective is not being a wider, broader perspective, that's why it's so important to talk to other people and to hear these other perspectives. Otherwise, and we're seeing the algorithm doing it online, but people do it themselves, where they get into their own self-dialogue and they have this conversation with themselves going, yeah, it's wrong. Yeah, it's wrong. He was wrong. Yeah, he was wrong. And then by the time they come out with it, it's that.
Mm.
And, you know, I've been at the blunt end of that one a few times too with people.
Yeah.
Well, I've been thinking that I find that there's the what's gone out of fashion is tolerance, right? And people are it's almost like an old-fashioned thing to be able to take things for a while. You know, we're all supposed to be instantly clear what we don't accept. So if something makes us uncomfortable, we don't have room anymore to feel uncomfortable for a bit, right? Like even so we had to start doing things like give trigger warnings on what would be a totally fine twist in a story as you make someone uncomfortable for a moment, and then there's a release at the end. Now we have to apologize ahead of time that the warning, the following might make you feel tense, right? And it's just crazy stuff. So it's like, we've become. I mean, I've described it with sometimes what people deal with in the office or at work, right? It's a preloaded. I had the word earlier. You're just ready to fire, right? You're ready to get angry, as in like you're waiting for the check boxes to go, and you go like, oh, I should be mad about this. Automatically, I'm going to be mad about this, right? So someone can say something, and they will get upset about it. Like one of the things that I did when I was on radio before is every now and then I do an accent, right?
Oh my goodness!
Oh, you both like doing that.
Yes.
Oh, Tim's had some problems.
Well, so what I found interesting is there were always people who are willing to get angry about me making an accent who actually weren't in that category. Let's say if I did an accent and people said that I was making fun of an accent, there were people who were more ready to come forward and get angry about the fact that I was doing it than the people who actually had the accent. You know, it was one of those things that people were prepared to be angry on behalf of other people, like the people who warn you about cultural appropriation, who have nothing to do with the culture that you are apparently appropriating, right? So it's sometimes that sort of it's people seeking significance, trying to find a way to be significant in the world, and they're looking around for the ways. Well, no, they're trying to find the ways that they can be significant. They want to everybody wants to contribute. They want to have something to say about it. They want to be there in the conversation. You know, like if you're in a group, they're all talking. Someone says this, someone says that, and somebody else goes, "Oh, well, I remember I did this as well." You know, that sort of a thing. And I think in the desperation to be significant, we find that being angry about things, something it's a simple way to get into that. You get to be upset significantly about it. We put out stuff where it's, you get strokes because someone puts the care emoji. I mean, if you think about that, right? If you look at the number of the emojis, there's the like emoji, there's the laugh emoji, there's the emoji, and then there's care and support, and it's quite high on that list of reactions that people look for. And I think people get addicted to that, and they get even a sense of FOMO as somebody else gets that.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I just want to say one thing. When people get angry, often what they want is certainty, because anger is a way of almost controlling an outcome. Because you're angry, people will back off. So you've created certainty of a response. So that means, and right now there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. And as you get older, you realize there's a lot more certainty. As you're a kid, it's very certain. You go to school, this is this is that, this is what you got to do. But as you go out there and have to make it on your own, if you are on your own, you realize there's a lot more uncertainty, and that uncertainty can cause the mental health problems as well. But then when people strive to then flip to get more certainty, one of the techniques that people often learn from modeling by others is anger gives you certainty. You can get angry with something, and usually anger is to express your certainty that you're right, or at least that other person is wrong, and that they back off a bit on the attack because of your going to DEFCON 5. So that anger gives them a sense of certainty that they felt uncertain before. And I find it if you self-reflect, and of course the angry people, you tell them to self-reflect, they'll tell you go put your head in a bucket. But but that moment of self-reflection, and usually that self-reflection will come from an angry person. It'll usually come when somebody's left them, or when they've had a crash and burn.
Right.
And
if they ever get there, yeah.
if they get there,
it's one of the chapters I talk about in my book is anger. So that realization that anger is expressed is not about where you're expressing it; it's actually within you, right? And I think it was Neil Donald Walsh who said it in one of his Conversation with God books, or one of the things I listened to. And I was like, wow, okay, so anger. So I sort of really took the thought on board. And the boys were small at the time, and they were driving me nuts. And I was like, rah, 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 at them. And I'm like, wait a minute, okay, all right, I'm angry. Am I angry with them? Really, truly, am I angry with them? And I realized I wasn't angry with them. I was just really frustrated with the situation because I didn't like being there doing that at that moment. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to be doing that.
Being taken over by them.
Yeah. And I was resentful of that, and I really recognized it. And then that was the moment when I said, well, I shouldn't feel guilty about. I don't enjoy this stage. I love them, but I don't enjoy the. I was never the mum that would sit down and play Legos with the kids. I didn't entertain them. Yeah, other people can do that. It's just not who I was, right? And but by recognizing it, it was good. It was saying. So anytime I got angry, I instantly went into the, am I really angry? And like even someone who sort of starts going off at you and starts being, saying crazy things, you kind of sit there and you're like, oh, I feel compassion for them because they're not angry with me. They're really not. They could go to their deathbed convinced that they are, but they're actually not. So I actually feel sorry when I see the amount of anger that sits in the world, because actually anger resolves nothing. And finding that peace within yourself, if you can, is. And when we go back to the enshittification thing that we're talking about, so when we're talking about denial, which I think we're also still talking about, but also the idea that things are going to become progressively worse. What we're actually talking about here is the fundamental systemic issue that we have in society that is creating these problems that we need to look it in the eye and address it and do everything we can to try and bring humanity back together. So I think, what we're really talking about here is a really core issue, which most people don't talk about. Everyone's sort of, you got all the raging and yelling and screaming going on around the edges. But what's at the core of the issue is that we've got to learn how to talk to each other again. And we've got to learn how to manage our emotions. We've got to develop our self-awareness muscles. We've got to recognize that anger anger poisons the body. It's so bad for you, But really, how do we reach those people who are so angry all the time? How do we reach them? How do we get them to talk and get them to go through the process they need to go through to release these words that they need to say before we can start having a different sort of conversation with them that helps them move into a better place for themselves and for everyone, do you know what I mean?
Now, I know Tim wants to reply to this. So before he does that, can I just demonstrate how I upset people? Tim, DEFCON 5 is actually the least severe of the levels. And DEFCON 1 is when you get most mad. Okay, back to you, Tim.
I appreciate knowing stuff like that.
Again. Well, now I've forgotten what I was going to say.
Nice.
Oh, I was going to say a couple of things. One was anger does resolve stuff if you get to the point where you realize you're angry about something, like Andrew was saying. There's that self-awareness part where you go, what am I angry about? And then what am I going to do about this? Because sometimes I can get so angry with myself that I haven't done something, that I finally get to the point that where the feeling of anger or self-annoyance is so great that I finally do the thing that I wanted to do, but I was putting off or whatever it is. So there's an element of that. But then how do you get through to the people, Andrea was saying, how do you get through to people that are so angry? And it goes back to my original point where it's got to be I think it's got to be actually, it doesn't have to be a trusted person, but it needs to be a person with some sort of integrity, at least, that can come to that person and go, hey, Andrea, I realized, I just noticed you were really angry just then. What's going on for you right now? And asking the opening up listening question, where I really want to hear what's behind this. Because you see people getting angry, it's the out of balance anger. It's the anger that is not commensurate with the situation or the context.
Yeah.
And it's that one that we
the frothing at the mouth one, right?
Yeah, it's just like, wow, you're getting really angry about that small thing. What's really going on?
Yeah.
And then hearing them out. And obviously you that's not the right question to ask at the moment that they're foaming at the mouth. It's got to be a little bit later going, hey, remember 2 days ago you were doing that? Yeah, I've been thinking about it. What's been going on for you, mate? And then hearing them out. And and I think we need the skills to be able to do that. And we need the courage to be able to ask that question, because because it's easy to sweep things under the carpet, to try and go, oh, let's just let it go. But it's not really helping your friend. It's not being a good friend.
Yeah.
And I think to be able to do that as leaders in an organization, we need to be able to do that. Quite frankly, as employees in the organization, we need to be able to do that for our leaders, because sometimes our leaders can be, I don't know if you've seen this in leadership, but I think I've noticed an enshittification happening in leadership as well. And we're promoting people who are getting a result, but leaving a wake of chaos in getting that result. And I think sometimes our values need a little bit more. We need to think about it. And so it goes back, I guess, to having a group of people around you who you have given permission, almost, not necessarily overtly, but you've given permission to them to call you out when you're being a dick.
Yeah. But let people be dicks sometimes. So this is Cindy Leong saying how anger is a healthy emotion. And we're not disagreeing with anger being an unhealthy emotion. Anger, of course we need anger, right? I get anger when I see someone who can't fend for themselves.
Righteous anger.
Exactly. That's probably the anger that I tap into the most. Disrespect. Auntie Vic, who used to work for our family for 18 years, if my boys spoke to her disrespectfully, oh my God, I was so angry, because it was just like, you do not disrespect that lady. She's too important. She's too valuable to our family. So they obviously grew up with deep respect for her, but every now and again, they got a bit lazy. So it's not about anger being an unhealthy emotion. I think it's more about there's this societal anger at the moment that is unhealthy for all of us, because we're not hearing each other. We're not, I remember talking about something at an event, and someone came up to me afterwards and they said, when I heard you speaking, and it was literally about content marketing, right? So how could this happen? I felt really angry with you. And I think I saw this person like a week later. He goes, I felt really angry with you. And I'm like, how can you be angry about me talking about love? And he's like, because he had this sort of self-awareness to realize that I was pushing buttons. And then he came to the conclusion that what I was actually saying was he agreed with what I was saying, but initially it challenged his sort of core beliefs. And that's another thing. when someone's speaking and you really like go, wow, I don't agree with that, and have a strong response, really try and take a step back and say, I need to think about this. Why am I reacting this way? Why is it so strong? And sometimes it's obvious you're just revolted by somebody because they've said something disgusting, but often it's just like, what they're saying really makes me uncomfortable. So you need to just give yourself time to go and think about it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think if I was to put two labels on it, there would be righteous anger, which is, it is right to be angry about this. That's an injustice, or this is wrong. And that's, I mean, forgive me for flipping into a biblical moment, but Jesus flipping the tables in the temple, and yet he's sinless and he was angry about it, means that if you were to hold to all of those statements, means that it's not sinful to be angry. You can be angry about things you're supposed to be angry about. Okay, moving back. Then what's the other side? The other side I would think would be possibly projective anger, where which is, I think, what you're saying, Andrea.
Yeah.
You're projecting something about your life or yourself or whatever it is into that situation and being angry at it without dealing with the actual thing that's in your life or situation that needs to be dealt with. And that requires that sort of element of self-reflection. The fact that this person can come up to you later and say, I really felt angry about this, is a sign of actually super maturity.
Yeah.
That, unless they're canceling you at the same time. But if they've reflected on it and saying that, then yeah, I think that's great.
Tim Hammonds is leaving some great comments here, and I wanted to say hi, but when anger comes up, be curious rather than judgmental. And I think that's great advice. So, Joe?
No, well, I mean, for me, there's always a difference between knowing what to do with it, as in, like, I've learned the strategies, right? I mean, I think I can't remember which Buddhist monk who said that, but basically is like, what you should do with anger is when it shows up, just be curious, observe it, and then just let it be outside of you. And I think that's a really brilliant idea. But I think where anger,
not furious.
Yeah,
be curious, not furious. I like it.
Thank you.
Anger usually comes up to me as a kind of thing where you are threatened in a material way, as in, like, it's a threat to self that you're protecting yourself against. And the self doesn't have to be a physical self. It can be about your belief. It can be about your values. And what you are reacting is having that, what you're reacting with really is that strong opposition to that, because what you're trying to do actually in that moment is not die. It's if someone is pushing up against your values, you actually have to go like, well, if that's different from me and I'm therefore wrong about this, then I've that image of that part of me is completely been wrong, so I don't really exist that way anymore, right? So it's very natural for people to kind of do that. But I think one of the things that I loved most about working with scientists of late is how delighted some of them are to find out they're wrong. It's just that it's a different reaction they've built themselves up to be, to react to things that way, to go like, oh, I'm wrong. Oh, wow, that's interesting. And it changes the way they can react to things. It doesn't mean that they still don't get angry, but it takes more for them to be angry about stuff, and sometimes it's all the funny stuff. I mean, I was just thinking about how it'd be great if we could try to shorten that amount of time that's needed for things to go from tragedy to comedy. I'm often guilty of finding things funny way before everybody does. But if we could do that, if we had, I always think about the world being a better place if everybody had a comedian's mindset, right? Then you could almost,
the world would be depressed.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's true.
It's more of a joke. Just that every comedian I've ever met, and I used to hang around a lot, they're all depressed, and they said they couldn't do it if they weren't depressed. But I get your point.
Yeah, it's like comedians are looking for funny material, and usually that comes from tragedy around them. And I feel like it's almost like if like when bad things happen to a regular person that doesn't have a means to use it or turn it into something else, it can be very frustrating. It can be upsetting. It gets in the way, right? But I do think that for let's I mean the world that we live in, which is a number of us are speakers, right? And it's almost as though when bad things happen to us as speakers, we go like, "Yay! I have a story to tell," you know. So for me, that was kind of what was my therapy when I was on radio. It was like every time something incredible happened, I had content, you know, and I almost spilled water in my studio, which would be fun. But there, yeah. So it's about framing the world. I think whatever you frame, whatever frame or whatever lens you're looking at the world through, can make such a difference to what is happening. Like for me, when I'm talking to somebody and they're talking about their relationship going south, I am seeing almost immediately how funny the whole thing is, right? Which is why I don't get the call very often. But you know, it's something I go like, and I try to encourage them to start feeling seeing how funny it is, and very often, you know, with them, I get to move them very quickly to going like, yeah, you know, they feel less hurt by the whole thing because they realize, you know, this is pretty ridiculous stuff anyway. So
Andrea, I want Joe to do my eulogy.
And mine too. Yeah, so that was Cindy who was talking about the passive aggressive response, because of course that's pretty much what I was talking about earlier. Those people that sort of come in and kind of with their kind of cut off statements. Yeah. That's
the
hard.
Family one is interesting to look at. She said the family one's toughest for her. I thought that's an interesting one, because the thing about family is that it's so loaded with history of button pressing and roles. And oftentimes I think those roles have not evolved with time. And sometimes that's why we can go back to a family reunion or a family, you know, go and meet your parents, whatever, and you feel like you're a kid again, stuck in that family dynamic of 40 years ago. Whereas, and it brings up these sorts of triggered responses, which is interesting to reflect upon. I think it's like, why am I back there again? Why am I letting that affect me that way? And it's possibly, you know, because it's something that hasn't been dealt with. But it's also, family should care about me more. And so you've got this rule that's being violated. Oftentimes we've got all these rules, and I think a lot of the anger that we lash out at others is because some rule that we've set up in our life, which may be unconscious, but some rule that we've got or value that we're holding to has been violated by either somebody's comment or somebody's button pressing because you're saying something intending to help them or cause change, but they're feeling defensive that you're disrespecting something else, so that they just press the button that they know is going to work and diffuse your bomb.
We're a few comments. I think we're just a few comments away from becoming an Esther Perel session. So,
all right, yeah, we should wrap up. But you know, but I just want to go back to the point, like, you know, enshittification, times are tough. They're going to get tougher no matter what we do. You know, whether it's war, geopolitics, who knows what's going on with that on that front with some of the elections we're seeing and the results. But obviously the whole polycrisis, biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, climate change, etc. So one of the things that I think we need to do en masse is be having conversations like we're having, and, you know, really sort of come together, because we've got to come together. Because if we don't come together, it's gonna be so much worse. So right across the world, we need to be building these communities that are there for each other, that listen to each other and support each other, because that's the only way through the years to come. So that's where I want to leave it. What about you guys? What final point?
Go make a new friend.
Yeah. When I was talking about denial as a strategy for dealing with the way things are, I was actually thinking in terms of mental health, right? In terms of how there is a way to look at things, and I know this is
interesting.
it's sort of cowering and going like, oh, it's not really happening, it's not really happening. But like the world we live in actually is the world we live in, all of us globally, right, already is a fiction, as in like it's stuff that's happening, and all the stories around it, our interpretation, all of it is someone's interpretation of it. It is not necessarily someone else's fiction, but it's our own fiction as well. So we can create a fiction that actually makes us more comfortable with things as well. And so things, and I don't want to cross the line too. I'll step gently across it into things like religion and other things as being coping mechanisms, methods of denial. There's a way of dealing with things. We come up with a story. We come up with a way of dealing with stuff where we don't look at this as just being this horrible circumstances happening to us. We describe it as a test of some kind, So it's again, like I said, everything really is ultimately a fiction. So if there is a fiction that is thrust upon us, then why not try and come up with a fiction that helps you? Right? Is there a way for you to come up with a way of doing things that is also productive? Right? You can be wrong about how things are, as in like you can have an attitude that says you have to spend money to make money. I mean, that's someone's fiction. It's true for some people and it's untrue for some other people.
The salesperson's fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But if it becomes your thing and you attach some values around it and you design your own fiction that says, well, I'll do this, and every time I spend money, it will have the following conditions and effects and whatever it is, then you create that and you can live that. And in a sense, that is a form of denial, right? You figure out you figure out a way for that story to work better for you. And if you can create that for the family, the relationship, I mean, I think that's a way that you can make life better for yourself. Now, the challenge that I've always had is this: how do you resist breaking somebody else's coping mechanism? Because I think there's too much of that going on. There's a really strong desire to go like, I found out the truth. Now you must as well. And I remember when I was, like just being a kid, right? My mom had done something which worked fantastically for my self-esteem. As in, like I was a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old in school, and objectively we were poor, but I never felt poor. It's just an idea. It's like that. It's denial.
It's a beautiful example. And I think we've just seen Joe get emotional for the first time. Is that correct?
I think he just stubbed his toe, possibly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I've got a condition.
No, it's interesting that I wasn't. Yeah, I was thinking of denial from just denying the truth before our eyes. I can't tell you how many conversations I have with people, and I'm like, okay, if that's what you think, I mean, here we go. But I think that's another way. But I think what your mum did was a kindness. And
beautiful, really. Look, I think the denial part goes back also to that concept of certainty, but also a mental health state where we're dealing with overwhelm, and it gives me more comfort to deny it than to face it. And I think, like what Andrew has been trying to do for the last 10,000 years is to get people to face it. Feels that way, doesn't it?
Or if you don't want to face it, just do something. So, because to me, it's all about action. So if you care about the environment, go and save something you care about. And get involved with a community group doing it, or create one if it doesn't exist. Go and join a church, a mosque, a temple. Go and be an active member in the community. You see in the local communities, because we're living a little bit out of the city now, I'm seeing much more of the local community that's happening in Singapore than I did when we used to live close to the city. And it's great, especially for the elderly. There's all sorts of activities going on. Volunteer, do something, be part of it, and or create something, start a sewing school, teach people how to sew, start a class where you teach people how to grow food, whether in their apartments or in their gardens, whatever people have got. Just be part, show people how to make things. Survival kits. What is it? What do you need? What do you need? How do you use what? You think of all the people that were brought up soft, without the outdoor stuff, right? How do we get them unsoft? I'm glad my boys are doing national service, because they're going to. I mean, even though their schooling's taken them out and experiencing those things, but they're also they're going to get those skills, right? How do we get those skills? Because we need them. So just get involved. I think that's.
Yeah, you know what? I think that's a really good suggestion, because when I said earlier, go out and make a new friend, it's bloody hard for isolated people who have lived that way to go out and make a new friend. But the way to do it is to go and join an existing community and contribute.
Yeah. And contribute.
Pardon?
And contribute. There's a lot of people sit at the back of the room, right? Get in the middle of the room, be part of it straight up front,
Ask questions if you don't understand something before, giving your opinion of why something's wrong just yet. But the other, so be a listener, go and join a community, be a listener. And it's the same thing for single people. Single people are just like, can't find anyone, everyone's taken, whatever it is. Go and join a community or something you're actually interested in. At least you possibly meet somebody that has got a similar interest, which is a good starting point.
Exactly.
But,
all right. Let's wrap up, because we've passed the 2 hour mark. What's keeping you distracted?
Joe, you want to hit it off?
Sure. I can tell you, I got 2 recommendations. One is A Man on the Inside. I'm not sure if you've seen that show being promoted to you on Netflix yet. I can't recall his name offhand right now. The guy who owned Cheers, the bar. What's his name?
Ted Danson.
Ted Danson.
Oh yeah, right. I haven't watched it yet.
Old folks home.
Yeah. That looks good.
That does look good.
Yeah. So it's put together by the same people who made The Good Place. It has a little bit of that feel, but it's a lighter vibe and actually really good. I think if there's an older person in your life as well, it's going to give you a bit of a nice reference point. And the other show that I think you'll like, Andrea, if you haven't already seen it, is Good Girls.
Okay.
It's a women buddy film, and they embark on a life of crime. And what I like about it is that it's not women having men problems and therefore they're criminals. They're women having women problems and therefore they're criminals.
Is that Good Sisters?
Good Girls.
Sorry? Good Girls.
Good Sisters? Yeah. Oh, okay. There was something about Good Sisters where they murdered somebody and then they had to. That looked quite funny.
Three sisters. Oh yeah. I saw that Irish one, right? There's 5 sisters or something. Yeah.
Something like that.
There's a 3 sisters one as well, and that looks pretty interesting. Yeah, but Good Girls. All right, Tim.
For me, well, yesterday I handed in my last assignment for this semester, so I'm officially on holiday. I feel that was an assignment on ethics where I actually talked about the U.S. election. So anyway, that was a 3,500 word assignment that went for 5,000 words because of the stupid election. But anyway, but in my procrastination to get that one done, I've been watching a couple of things, and Shrinking was one of the ones that I got into, which I just thought was hilarious. In fact,
so good.
It took me a while to get the format, because I was trying to go, why is this so peculiar? And it's basically what would happen if you've got a community of people, including psychologists, who are unfiltered. And it just, the whole thing could be called Unfiltered. They just say stuff, and they say, and so it's almost artificially odd how open and in your face they are, but it's refreshing in a sense as well. It's quite cool. I like it. I love the neighbors. It's cool. The other thing I finally did, and I've been putting it off, and I felt a sense of loss afterwards, as I finished Ted Lasso season 3, and which I think is the final one by the looks of it. And I love that show. I just thought it was so endearing, and as a football lover, it was doubly so. But I loved it. So I immediately started watching Welcome to Wrexham, which is more documentary style, but we'll see what happens. I'm only just started that.
There is a talk about season 4 of Ted.
Are they? I don't think they should do it. I think
no, they're talking about it.
Yeah,
I agree.
Oh, I believe whenever there's enough money in anything, they should do it.
True. Yeah, but you know what? There's purity in completion. Go and use your imagination to come up with something else. I think that's just milking a cash cow at this point. But I think it can severely kill a beautiful thing. You know.
Well, let's see. I can't imagine they'll fail it. All right, so I'm finally getting my opportunity to finish season 7 of Sheldon, which sounds pathetic, but I don't care. I've absolutely loved it. Only because my husband was away this week. That's why I got to watch it. But one of the shows we did watch, which I want to recommend, is not a feel good. It's called Praying for Armageddon. Have you guys seen it yet?
Nope.
No.
All right, so this is about the far-right extremist Christian nationalists in the US and what their agenda is, how much it infiltrates American politics and society, the military, you name it. Some of the things Trump did in his first term in Israel that had never been done before, which the Christian nationalists were very happy with, including moving the embassy to Jerusalem and putting an American military base on Israeli soil. So basically, if even an accidental shot goes into that base, they can be at war. And obviously, it's all about the essential thing is about the second coming of Christ, and they believe it on such a deep level. And so, if you'll understand why America supports Israel as much as it does, if you watch this. But also the idea that, so in the last election, there was a lot of interviews with Muslims trying to discourage them from voting for Biden because of what he did to support the war in Israel. And then they were talking about what Trump would do, which is obviously a lot more extreme. So it kind of was interesting. But yeah, so Praying for Armageddon. And this is something,
I've got comedy. It's a comedy, do you say?
Yeah, definitely not a comedy. I mean, I've got an end of times believer in my own family. I grew up around it, but Steve was kind of like, "Whoa, bloody hell, this is crazy." I'm like, "Well, yeah." I'm like, "Of course you wouldn't know this stuff." Yeah, I'm sure. Joe, you must have an apocalyptic believer in the family, if you in a Catholic family, right? You must have somebody. The end of times.
They're all certainly in the closet. Then I don't think anyone's showing up, at least on my radar for now. But then again, that could be just denial at work.
I'm going to deny something too. I don't believe those people are real Christians for a start. I think they've misrepresented the brand, so to speak. And the other thing is, if they've actually read the Bible, Revelation in particular, why would you want the second coming to be in your lifetime? It's going to be an absolute horror fest. You just don't want it. You don't want it.
So, but that's the point, right? So everything that's going on in the world at the moment, how horrific it is with wars, it's okay because it was in Revelations. It's predicted, right?
Yeah, but I mean, World War I, World War II are worse than right now. But you know what I mean?
If we go nuclear. Yeah, I know. But go and watch it.
And by the way, if I was Christ, I wouldn't come back now just because a bunch of American evangelicals decide that they want me to. It's just like, no.
And if Christ came back, who could also be a woman or a person of a different nationality, or you never know, right? The chances are they will be rejected anyway by those same people.
I think
they have a really great TikTok game, though.
I don't think he's coming back the same way he came back the first time.
Exactly,
this time,
right?
Clouds and chariots are going to be involved. Anyway, but
all right. So it's Tim's last show for the year. Joe and I will be back in 2 weeks for our last show of the year, and we're going to talk about just all the crazy stuff that's happened this year, right?
Yeah, I get to go to Australia and say hi to Mum and Dad, and hopefully it's not on fire when I get there.
So yeah, exactly. Well, it's not looking good. So I want to. We've had Cindy, Tim. We've got two. I'm looking
two
at
Davids.
two Davids. just want to thank everyone. And we've had a couple of people whose names we can't see. Thanks for chipping in and joining the conversation. It's been really great. And yeah, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Joe and Tim, have a great holiday.
Yeah.
And happy
Thanks,
Thanksgiving to everyone celebrating it. All right.
Right.
Which is nobody watching right now.
Yeah, well, that's true. All right. Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye.